The Galactic Council was filled with a sense of anticipation as the members settled into their seats. The grand hall of the Aldarian Palace was a place where history was made, where the fate of entire systems was often decided. Today, however, the atmosphere was charged with mockery, disbelief, and thinly veiled laughter. No one truly expected what was about to unfold. At the front of the room, the king's will lay open on a golden pedestal, awaiting its moment to be read. The Aldarian system had long been known for its wealth and power, its royal family revered throughout the galaxy. King Aldarian VII had been a leader like no other. His decisions shaped not only his system, but also had ramifications across the galaxy. So when he died unexpectedly, it left the council in a state of uncertainty. The gathered representatives from the various worlds waited for the announcement of the new ruler. Many believed it would be the king's eldest son, Prince Raylan, a military genius and a popular figure among the council. Others whispered that the throne might pass to Princess Evelina, though she was rarely seen in public and kept a low profile due to the harsh criticism she often received. The princess was known for her intellect, but also for her appearance, which her father had often referred to in harsh terms. Despite her royal blood, she had never quite fit the ideal image of the Aldarian family. The large double doors at the back of the room opened, and a man stepped forward, a human. His name was Alexander Sterling. He was a young, average-looking man from Earth, far from the powerful dynasties and ancient families of the galaxy. His clothes were simple, a stark contrast to the rich silks and intricate armor worn by the council members. His entrance was met with confusion, whispers, and then laughter. The chief counselor, a towering figure from the planet Neros, cleared his throat loudly. "A human? This is some kind of joke, surely," he muttered under his breath. Others joined in, chuckling at the absurdity of the situation. Alexander stood motionless, looking at the council as if he had just walked into a dream. He had no idea how he ended up here. The message he had received had been brief and cryptic, summoning him to this distant corner of the galaxy. Now, standing in the heart of the Aldarian Palace, he was about to hear his name mentioned in connection to a legacy he had never known. As the laughter died down, the head of the council, Lady Alira, stood and gestured for the proceedings to continue. "It appears the will has chosen a new heir," she said, her voice cold and professional. "Let us proceed." The room fell silent as she read aloud the will of King Galdarion. The king's words echoed in the hall, and as they did, the laughter returned. The king, in his infinite wisdom, or perhaps his cruelty, had decided that the throne was to pass not to his son, Prince Raylan, but to Alexander Sterling. The will also contained a peculiar clause. The human heir was to marry the king's daughter, Princess Evelina, who, according to the king's words, was the ugly daughter of the family. The laughter that followed was loud, cruel, and unrelenting. Alexander's heart raced as the mocking tones filled the room. He stood there, frozen, unsure of what to make of it all. He had never met King Aldarion, never heard of Princess Evelina, and yet here he was, somehow tied to their legacy. Evelina herself had been sitting in the back of the room watching with quiet despair. She had always been in the shadow of her more charismatic family members, and now, even in death, her father's harsh words haunted her. The ugly daughter. Those words stung every time she heard them, even if they came from her father. She had resigned herself to a life of obscurity, living in the background while her family's legacy carried on without her. The idea that a human, someone from a planet so far away, would now take the throne with her at his side was too much to bear. Her heart sank further as the proceedings continued. She knew what the council thought of her, what they thought of her father's words. Her insecurities were laid bare in front of everyone. She had spent her entire life trying to hide her flaws, to be more like her father wanted. And now she had been thrust into the spotlight, a source of ridicule for all to see. But there was no escape. The king's will had made its decision. The council may have laughed, but they knew better than to ignore the will of the late king. They had no choice but to accept it, even if they were less than pleased about it. "Evelina," Lady Alira said, turning to face the princess. "It appears you now have a new guardian, a new ruler. What say you?" Evelina stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no choice but to comply. She had been handed a future she did not choose. She glanced at Alexander, who met her gaze with a mixture of confusion and determination. He had no idea what he was getting into, she thought. He was just as much a pawn in this game as she was. "I accept," Evelina said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. She had no choice but to follow the king's will, but that did not mean she would surrender quietly. She would fight for her place, for her dignity. Even if the galaxy didn't see it, she knew her worth. Alexander nodded at her, trying to offer a smile of reassurance, but even he knew that this wasn't a simple matter. The council may have laughed, but the true test was just beginning. After the proceedings ended, Alexander was led to his new quarters within the palace. It was a lavish room, far beyond anything he had ever known on Earth, but none of it felt real. He was supposed to be a ruler now, a king of a system he knew nothing about, with no idea of what to do next. His thoughts were consumed with the princess, who had agreed to this strange arrangement without protest. What was going through her mind? What kind of person would she be? He couldn't even begin to imagine. Meanwhile, Evelina sat alone in her chambers, staring out at the vast expanse of space beyond the palace walls. She had been born into a legacy that was now slipping away, replaced by a human who would forever alter the course of her life. The princess was no fool. She understood the politics at play here. This wasn't just about an inheritance. It was about power, control, and the manipulation of history. She wasn't blind to the way the council had ridiculed her, or the way her father had set her up for failure with his cruel words. But she was no longer willing to be the victim in this story. She would find a way to make her voice heard. She would prove that she was more than just her father's words. No matter what the galaxy thought of her, she knew her worth. The days that followed were filled with endless meetings, endless discussions, and endless mockery from the council. They tested Alexander at every turn, questioning his every decision, undermining his authority at every opportunity. And yet, through it all, the human refused to back down. He didn't have the royal blood of the Aldarian family, but he had something else. He had determination, and perhaps that was what was needed in this galaxy. A fresh perspective, a new kind of ruler. Evelina, meanwhile, remained mostly silent, but she watched, she observed, and she began to see something in Alexander that others did not. He wasn't a fool. He wasn't here to play games. He was here to lead, and she could respect that. As the days turned into weeks, Alexander and Evelina began to form an unlikely alliance. She shared her knowledge of the Aldarian system, its politics, and its history. He shared his ideas, his fresh approach to ruling, and his unwillingness to accept the council's cynicism. The galaxy may have laughed at the idea of a human inheriting the Aldarian throne, but in the quiet moments between them something began to change. Perhaps, just perhaps, this was the beginning of a new chapter for the Aldarian system, a chapter that neither the council nor the galaxy had anticipated. Weeks had passed since the unexpected inheritance of the Aldarian throne, and the galaxy had not stopped talking about it. Alexander Sterling, a human from Earth, had become the new ruler of the Aldarian system, much to the disbelief and amusement of the Galactic Council. Their laughter had died down, replaced by a quiet, simmering resentment. They had expected the system to fall into chaos without a true Aldarian on the throne. What they did not expect was the steady resolve of the human who had taken the king's place, and his quiet, constant ally, Princess Evelina, though the mockery still echoed in the palace corridors. Alexander refused to back down. The first few days had been difficult, filled with constant challenges from the council, who tried to undermine him at every opportunity. They questioned his ability to lead, laughed at his lack of experience, and suggested that the only reason he had inherited the throne was because of his marriage to Princess Evelina, the so-called ugly daughter of King Aldarion. The counselors made it clear that they did not believe in his legitimacy, and neither did many of the planets in the Aldarion system. Evelina had endured her own trials. While her father's harsh words about her appearance had left deep scars, it was the unrelenting pity from the rest of the galaxy that hurt the most. The laughter of the council only reinforced the notion that she was a disappointment, a flaw in the royal bloodline. She had never been the charming, beautiful princess her family had hoped for. Her beauty had always been in question, and she had long since learned to accept that. But now, with Alexander at her side, something inside her began to stir, an uncomfortable feeling she hadn't felt in years. As the days passed, Evelina found herself spending more time with Alexander, observing him as he navigated the complex political landscape of the Aldarion system. She had been born into this world, raised to understand its nuances and intricacies. But Alexander was different. He came from a world where political games were a distant concern, where survival depended on quick thinking and adaptability. His mind, though inexperienced in the ways of the galaxy, was sharp, and he saw things that others didn't. Evelina watched him struggle in council meetings, but she also watched how he never gave up. He would stand up to their mocking remarks with an unwavering voice, refusing to back down. While the council laughed at him, Alexander was quietly learning. He asked questions, listened carefully, and made decisions that, over time, began to show wisdom beyond his years. One afternoon, after a particularly heated council meeting, Evelina found Alexander standing by the large windows of the palace, staring out into the vast expanse of space. The stars twinkled in the distance, a silent reminder of how small they all were in the grand scheme of the universe. She hesitated for a moment before walking over to him. "I never thought I would end up here," Alexander said quietly, not turning to face her. "I never imagined I'd inherit a throne, much less marry someone I barely know." Evelina stood beside him, looking out into the stars as well. "I never imagined I'd be here either. When my father died, I thought my life would continue as it always had, quiet, in the shadows. But now, things are different." She hesitated, her gaze shifting to the floor. "You must think I'm nothing but a burden. My father's cruel words, they've haunted me for so long. It's hard to know where I fit in this new world." Alexander finally turned to her, his expression softening. "You're not a burden, Evelina. I never thought of you that way." "I don't know you very well yet, but I can see the strength in you. You've been through a lot, more than anyone could imagine, and yet you're still here, helping me. That counts for something." Evelina blinked in surprise. She had never heard anyone speak to her like that before, especially not someone from another world, someone who had no reason to care for her well-being. She felt a strange warmth stir inside her chest, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe his words. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander smiled at her, his gaze steady. "We're in this together. We have to be. The council will never accept me as the true heir. But we can prove them wrong. Together, we can make this work." Over the following weeks, Alexander and Evelina began to form a deeper bond, one based not on duty, but on mutual respect and understanding. While Alexander focused on learning the political strategies needed to secure his place as ruler, Evelina offered her wisdom and insight into the system's inner workings. She guided him through the labyrinth of alliances, rivalries, and betrayals that threatened to tear apart the fragile peace in the Aldarion system. It wasn't easy. The council continued to plot behind the scenes, trying to undermine Alexander at every turn. They questioned his decisions, painted him as weak, and suggested that his alliance with the princess was a political marriage born of desperation. But with each passing day, Alexander grew stronger, more confident in his decisions. He proved that he was not a puppet to be controlled, and that he would not let the council dictate the future of the Aldarian system. Evelina, too, began to find her voice. As she worked alongside Alexander, she realized that she had more to offer than just her royal bloodline. She had the knowledge, the experience, and the resilience to stand beside him as a true partner. No longer content to hide in the shadows, she started speaking up in council meetings, offering her own perspectives, and challenging the council's assumptions. Slowly, the other members of the council began to notice her presence. They had once written her off as a weak and insignificant figure, but now they saw her for what she truly was, a woman of intelligence, strength, and determination. Still, the weight of her father's words hung over her. Every time the council laughed or made a cruel remark about her, it stung all over again. But with Alexander by her side, she began to see the laughter for what it truly was: fear. The council feared change, and they feared what she and Alexander might accomplish together. And that fear, in its own strange way, gave her strength. One evening, as Alexander and Evelina were walking through the palace gardens, discussing strategies for the upcoming council meeting, they were interrupted by a visitor, the counselor from the planet Ixia. A tall, imposing figure named Barthol approached them with a sly smile on his face. He was one of the most vocal critics of Alexander's rule, and he had not been shy about expressing his disapproval. "I see the human is getting comfortable in his new position," Barthol said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "How quaint." Alexander stood tall, his expression calm but firm. "I am not here for your amusement, Barthol. I'm here to lead, and I intend to do so." Barthol raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Lead? You're nothing more than a puppet. You've been handed a throne by the will of a dead man, and you think you can command the respect of this council?" "I don't think so." Evelina stepped forward, her eyes blazing with determination. "You underestimate us, Barthol. You underestimate Alexander, and you underestimate me. We're not here for your approval. We're here to lead whether you like it or not." Barthol's smile faltered, but he quickly recovered. We'll see how long that lasts," he muttered, before turning on his heel and walking away. Alexander looked at Evelina, his expression filled with gratitude. "Thank you." "I don't know if I could have said that better myself." Evelina smiled faintly, though there was a certain sadness in her eyes. "We have a long road ahead of us, but I'm willing to walk it with you." And so they did. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with obstacles and challenges, but Alexander and Evelina were no longer alone in this fight. Together, they would challenge the council's prejudices, push back against their ridicule, and prove that they were worthy of the legacy they had inherited, not as a human and ugly princess, but as leaders in their own right. The galaxy would have to reckon with them, and whether they liked it or not, change was coming. The days in the Aldarian palace seemed to stretch on endlessly. Despite the initial mockery and scorn, Alexander had found his place in the world of galactic politics. Slowly but surely, he was gaining the respect of those around him, not just as a ruler, but as someone who was capable of leading, despite being an outsider in a galaxy full of ancient traditions. He was not the royal heir many had expected. He was a human, but in many ways that had become his strength. Evelina, too, had grown in ways she never thought possible. The time she had spent in the shadows, hiding behind her father's cruel words and the expectations of her family, was beginning to feel distant. Her voice, once soft and uncertain, had become strong and commanding. It wasn't just because of Alexander's support. It was because she had finally realized her own worth. The two of them had begun working together as partners, navigating the complexities of the Aldarian system. They had faced resistance from the council, but with each passing day, they became more adept at handling the challenges thrown their way. They knew they couldn't win the council's approval easily, but they didn't need it. They were building something new, something strong. One evening, as they sat together in the grand library of the palace, a message arrived. It was from a distant planet in the Aldarian system, one that had been a long-time ally of the royal family. The message was brief, but urgent. The planet was under attack. The council had no immediate plans to respond, but Evelina and Alexander knew that this was more than just an isolated incident. This was a sign of something bigger, something that could change everything. Alexander looked at Evelina, his expression serious. "We need to act fast. If we don't respond, it could be the beginning of something much worse." Evelina nodded, her mind racing. She had always been able to read the political landscape with precision, but this was different. This was a direct threat to their authority, and it couldn't be ignored. "We need to gather allies," she said firmly. "The council won't help us, but we don't need them. We have our own supporters." They quickly began making arrangements to meet with representatives from the neighboring planets, hoping to rally support before the situation escalated further. They couldn't afford to wait for the council's approval. This was their chance to prove that they could lead, truly lead, on their own terms. As the days passed, Alexander and Evelina traveled from planet to planet, meeting with allies and securing pledges of support. They faced skepticism and suspicion at every turn, but they refused to back down. Their mission was clear. They would protect the Aldarian system and secure their place as true rulers. No one, not even the council, could stand in their way. Meanwhile, the council continued to plot behind the scenes. They saw Alexander and Evelina's growing influence as a threat to their power. The idea of a human and a so-called ugly princess leading the system was too much for them to accept. But the more the council plotted, the more Alexander and Evelina grew in strength. Their allies were loyal and their cause was just. They weren't just fighting for the throne. They were fighting for a better future for the Aldarian system. At the heart of their efforts was a strategic meeting with the leaders of the planet Dracos, a military powerhouse in the Aldarian system. The planet had always been an ally of the Aldarian family, but with the recent turmoil, their loyalty had been questioned. It was up to Alexander and Evelina to secure their support, and it wouldn't be easy. As they arrived on Dracos, they were met by General Zoran, a tall, imposing figure who commanded the respect of his people. His reputation as a fierce and unyielding leader had earned him the title of one of the most powerful figures in the galaxy. He had never met Alexander or Evelina in person, and his first impression was one of skepticism. "You're the human who inherited the throne?" General Zoran asked, his voice cold and disbelieving. "And you're the princess everyone calls ugly." Evelina's face hardened, but Alexander placed a hand on her arm to calm her. He had grown used to the rude remarks and ridicule from those who still saw him as an outsider. It was not the first time he had been called out for his heritage, but it still stung. "We don't need your approval," Alexander said, his voice steady. "What we need is your support. The Aldarion system is in danger. If we don't act now, we could lose everything." Zoran raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "And why should I trust you? You're not even Aldarion. You don't belong here." Evelina stepped forward, her eyes fierce. "Because we're the only ones who can protect this system now. We are the future of the Aldarian family, whether you like it or not. And we need you to stand with us." There was a long silence as Zoran studied them both. For a moment, Evelina thought he might turn them away, but then something in his expression shifted. He had seen the determination in their eyes, the fire that had been kindled in their hearts. He had seen it in his own soldiers many times before. It was the sign of a true leader. "I'll support you," he said finally. "But know this, if you fail, it won't just be your crown at risk. It will be everything we've fought for. The galaxy will not forgive you if you fail." With that, Zoran offered them his full support, pledging troops and resources to their cause. It was a turning point for Alexander and Evelina. They had won their first major victory, and it had come at the hands of one of the galaxy's most respected leaders. But their journey was far from over. As they returned to the Aldarian system, the Council's hostility only grew. They had seen the alliance between Alexander, Evelina, and the powerful planet Dracos as a direct challenge to their authority. But no matter how hard they tried to undermine them, they could not break the bond that had been forged between the human and the princess. The council's attempts to discredit them only made Alexander and Evelina stronger. Every setback, every insult, only fueled their determination to succeed. They knew that they could not let the council win. If they did, the galaxy would remain locked in its old ways, with power controlled by the same few families and planets that had ruled for centuries. But with their new allies and their unwavering resolve, they were ready to make their stand. The battle for the future of the Aldarion system was about to begin, in earnest. Alexander and Evelina knew that it wouldn't be easy. There would be battles fought on the ground, in space, and in the council chambers, but they were prepared. Together, they would face whatever challenges came their way. And with each victory, they would prove that the galaxy's laughter had been nothing more than a fleeting echo. They would show the galaxy that they were the true rulers of the Aldarion system, and that no one, not even the council, could stop them. The tension in the Aldarion system had reached its breaking point. What had begun as a mockery, a human inheriting the throne, a so-called ugly princess by his side, had evolved into a powerful, unstoppable force. The council, despite all their scheming and plotting, could no longer deny the growing strength of Alexander and Evelina. The alliance they had formed with the powerful military planet Dracos was just the beginning. Now, they had the support of other key systems, and their reputation was spreading like wildfire throughout the galaxy. But the council wasn't ready to let go of its control. They had spent centuries building their power, and they weren't about to let some outsider and a princess they had long underestimated tear it all down. Their hatred was no longer just about Alexander's status as a human. It was about the future, a future that Alexander and Evelina were now shaping with every decision they made. The final showdown was coming. Alexander and Evelina knew it, and so did the council. The stakes had never been higher. It was late one evening when they received word that the council was gathering for a final meeting to decide the fate of the Aldarion system. The message was clear. If Alexander and Evelina didn't show up and submit to the council's authority, the entire system would be plunged into war. The council had enough power to initiate a conflict on a scale the galaxy had not seen in centuries. For the first time since he had inherited the throne, Alexander felt the full weight of his position. He had never wanted war. He had never wanted conflict. He had come to Aldarion to make a difference, to lead, not to destroy. But now, the council was forcing his hand. If they wanted war, then war they would get. "I never thought it would come to this," Alexander said, his voice low as he and Evelina sat together in their private chambers. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air. "We've done everything we can to avoid this, but they're leaving us no choice." Evelina, her gaze fixed on the stars outside the window, nodded. "They don't see us as equals."
They never will. But that doesn't mean we back down.
"We've already proven that we're capable of leading. We've gained the support of the galaxy's most powerful allies. They underestimate us, but they won't for long." Alexander's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the uncertainty that had plagued him in the beginning seemed to vanish. They were no longer the mockery the council had believed them to be. They were the future of the Aldarion system. Together they could face anything. "We go to the council tomorrow," he said, his voice resolute, "and we show them that we are not afraid." The following day, they arrived at the council hall with an air of determination. The council members were already seated, their faces grim and unfriendly. The tension in the room was palpable. It was clear that this was not going to be another ordinary meeting. This was the moment of truth. Lady Alira, the head of the council, stood up to address them. "You've ignored our warnings long enough," she said, her voice cold and sharp. "You've gathered your allies, you've made your moves, but you are still nothing more than an outsider and a princess. You are not Aldarion. You are not fit to rule. If you continue to defy the council, there will be consequences." Alexander stood tall, his gaze unwavering. We've never wanted to defy the Council. We've always wanted to work together. But the Council's refusal to accept us, to see us for what we are, has forced our hand. If you want war, then we will give it to you. The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Duh. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. They had expected Alexander to cower, to beg for mercy. But he was not the man they thought he was. He had spent months learning, growing, and understanding the complexities of leadership. And now, with Evelina by his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. "We are not here to fight," Evelina said, her voice calm but firm. "We are here to lead. We are here to protect the Aldarian system, not just for ourselves, but for everyone. If the Council cannot accept that, then it is the Council that is lost." The Council members shifted in their seats, clearly unsettled by the strength of Evelina's words. Lady Alira's face was a mask of fury, but she could not deny the growing support Alexander and Evelina had garnered from the galaxy's most powerful factions. They were no longer just a human and a princess. They were a symbol of change, a force that could not be ignored. "Enough!" Lady Alira snapped, slamming her hand on the table. "We cannot allow this to continue. If you insist on opposing the Council, then you will face the consequences." With that, the Council members began to rise from their seats, and for a moment, it seemed as though a battle was inevitable. But just as tensions reached their peak, a voice rang out from the back of the room. "I think it's time we had a different perspective on the matter." The voice belonged to General Zoran, the leader of Dracos. He had been silent throughout the meeting, but now he stepped forward, his tall frame commanding attention. "The Council has long controlled the fate of the galaxy, but that era is over," he continued, his voice steady and powerful. "The Aldarian system belongs to the people, not just to the Council. And if the Council insists on threatening war, then it is the Council that will face the consequences." Zoran's words were like a spark that ignited a fire. One by one, the representatives from the other allied planets stood up, pledging their support for Alexander and Evelina. The tide had turned. The Council had underestimated the strength of the new rulers, and now they were realizing the full extent of their mistake. Lady Alira's face grew pale as she looked around the room. The Council had lost its grip on the galaxy. The very system they had spent centuries building was slipping through their fingers. "You are making a grave mistake," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "You will regret this." But it was too late. The Council was no longer in control. Alexander and Evelina had done what they had set out to do. They had united the galaxy, and they had proven that they were capable of leading. As the meeting came to an end, Alexander and Evelina stood together, their hands clasped. They had faced down the Council and emerged victorious. But they knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome. But for the first time, they were confident that they could face anything. The galaxy was changing. The Aldarian system was changing. And Alexander and Evelina were at the heart of it all. As they left the council hall side by side, they looked out at the stars. The galaxy that had once mocked them now recognized their strength. The laughter had died down, replaced by a quiet respect, and in the silence of space, Alexander and Evelina knew that they had forged a new path for the future, a path that no one, not even the council, could ever erase.